Now, 1 foot off center.
And now it's on, gonna blow your mind.
Rick Maddison here for 1 Foot Off Center, presented by our good friends at Soil to Sod Landscaping. If you ever wondered who did some of the most beautiful landscaping in town, Soil to Sod probably did. They can help design, budget. If you're going for xeriscaping or just plain make the neighbors jealous, they can do that. They also love to work with builders. Go to soiltosod.ca for more information. They did the work at my house, and Scott is always talking about it. It's a divine yard. Landing strip for angels. I think that's what you said.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's what you said.
I did say that last time, I recall.
Okay. So this is 1 Foot Off Center. Again, we have both sides of the political spectrum. And
in the middle.
And Scott.
And then there's Scott. So anyway, the beauty about this group is I actually love chatting with these guys. I know it doesn't come across that way sometimes, but I actually do. So let's dive into it, fellas. Quick recap, there was an election in Canada. I know you probably weren't aware of it, but it happened, and just wanted to go around the room. Of course, I want to start with my good friend Jeff Cox. Election results, my friend. What was your thoughts? Were you gutted? Did you feeling euphoric? Tell me about your feelings.
You know what? Democracy is democracy, and people spoke. I think there was a couple things that come out of this. First, and I'm being very sincere, to me, it was proof that democracy is alive in Canada. Votes were up significantly. We're not hindered by conspiracy theory on counts and things of that nature. At least not in the mainstream. I'm sure there's fringes. I think we are truly a beacon of democracy right now, and that's positive. Again, this is probably where the debate starts. The Liberals won at a full collapse of the NDP, and you can slice and dice this any way you want. My message, not that it matters to the Liberals as a generalization, is 41 or 42% of the country voted the other way. In any other election, Harper, Trudeau, Chrétien, that's a majority government. It's not been since Brian Mulroney that we've seen vote counts that high from his first term. It's got to be a cautionary tale, and I'm being dead serious here. If we're going to come together and we're going to figure this out, which is in everyone's best interest at this point. I don't want 18 or 24 months of disaster so that the Conservatives can come into power. He's going to have to figure out how to bring the country together with 42% of them believing that he was not the right fit. What's happening in Alberta right now is very concerning, and I think you can criticize Danielle Smith all you want. I think she's tired and done. Jason Kenney's made the same points. Preston Manning is leading it from a different angle. I think Mr. Carney or Prime Minister Carney's got to pay attention to that and say, we got to figure this out. That is my message right now. I'm willing to put everything aside and say, hey, listen, they won. This is democracy. I believe in democracy, but you got to figure out what those 41% of people want, at least a little bit. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. And for me, what do I want? I want my house to stop getting looted on a weekly basis. Like, I want crime to I want GDP to grow. These are not
big
obscure ass. Mm-hmm. I want to get back to living in a society where my kids can go out with my wife in the downtown that they live and feel comfortable. And that doesn't exist today. So I don't think they're a big ask. I'm trying to be very pragmatic and say, listen, we're here, let's do this. Now we got to see where it goes.
Okay. No, it's good thought. And just one more thought: minority government. I think they have 169. Was that?
I think it went down. Well, they're flipping because some of the ridings are. I just looked, and one riding is flipping back and forth and back and forth. Yeah, so 168, 169.
Depends if they have pen or pencil at that polling station. Mr. Mattiussi, what were your thoughts on the election? I mean, you would be exuberant. I didn't get a call for the after party, but.
Yeah. No, I mean, was I exuberant? Yeah, well, a little, because I certainly thought that at this moment in time, and I think this is a very unique election, and people say, oh, this is the demise of the NDP. No, it's not.
No.
Not at all. They'll come back, like everybody's come back before. I personally believe that Mark Carney at this time and place was the person. I also believe that he'll govern like a red Tory. I think there's nothing in his background that would tell me he's going to be Jagmeet Singh. I just believe that. And to your point, I really hope that we find ways to address Alberta's and the West, not just Alberta. Alberta speaks a lot, but the West and some of the issues around that. Again, I hope he does too, because I think somebody's going to have to. I look at the Conservative Party right now, and regardless, you have a split, right? You have Doug Ford, you have the guy from Nova Scotia. That's putting a lot of pressure, and my fear is that if the Conservative Party gets embroiled into a battle, which nobody needs right now, it's not good for anyone right now. We have to really pull together. That'll just fuel a reform separatist party on its own. I mean, you'll see that kind of split more than anything else. So, fingers crossed that people get everything together. I think the nation has to take a big breath and roll up our sleeves, see where we could go in the next year or so, and hope for the best, because it's in all our interests that on some level, right, the Liberals can navigate us through this. That's who we picked.
Yeah.
I can't say this. If it doesn't go well, you are going to hear about it from us, Mr. Mattiussi. Mr. Scott Lanigan, from the Divine side, did God's Party
There's
win?
a lot there. Wow, that is something asking there, Rick. I would say things that stand out to me, I'm not going to answer that question, is it's fascinating to me that, if you take kind of the major parties, Green, NDP, Conservative, and Liberal, 3 of those leaders, because Green had 2, didn't get their seats. And to me, that's a really unique, interesting outcome of this election. And I don't have the reasons why, but to me, that says something. And I think rhetoric got lost in reality at somewhat, especially for the Conservatives. That rhetoric, they just kept going on the same pathway, and obviously it didn't resonate. It resonated for a year and a half, and then it didn't anymore. And I think you have to give credit to the Liberal Party for strategy. And politics still politics, and they recalibrated once Justin Trudeau resigned. And they executed with perfection, I think, in the reality of how the election flipped so quickly. Interestingly, I think 59 seats flipped in this election as well. Mm-hmm. And that was between mainly Liberal and Conservative. And, what is that an indicator of? I think people are highly influenced, and they're influenced by social media. They're influenced by advertising, and especially the younger demographic. Like my kids, I have 20, 24, and 26. They all were informed primarily by social media, what they read, what the memes, and that type of conversation. That was not too different than our friends down south, where they said, like Joe Rogan's podcast had a major influence on the election. It's that social conversation. And I think whatever party can understand that in a more holistic way to actually speak to those young kids. It was interesting. In elementary school, they always do a mock election. They almost had 900 grade school kids. And Conservatives won with 160 seats and Liberals with 143. Like that
was a minority.
Yeah, it was. It was really fascinating. And they said cost of living was one of the primary things elementary school kids said was kind of in their purview. And
did their homework.
I know.
It's ironic. I mean, if you've not read it, it's a genius. It's wild. So into post-secondary or into secondary education too, and it'll be interesting to see if this movement continues, because when I was 15 to 25 years old, like no one was conservative. That was unheard of. And today, they are in these mock elections, the Conservatives continue to win time and time again. It was the same in the provincial election here in British Columbia. It was bizarre. So interesting shift. And I'm no matter what you sound like you're defending it. I'm not. But I just want to
We
make
know
this
you're
point.
not. It's okay.
I'm not sure the like the reality is people say, oh, they lost a 28-point lead, but they didn't. I'm not sure there is much more conservative votes in Canada than what they got this term. That's not what happened. They didn't lose. They actually arguably gained from even when they had that lead. it was the demise of the block. It was the I'm not going to say the demise of the block. It was that the block lost a significant amount of seats. It was the absolute demise of the NDP that really shifted to a Liberal vote. And I don't know that you're ever going to convince, no matter what you do, that group of people that they're going to vote Conservative. So I'm not sure that there was any opportunity for these guys to win. They still need to look in the mirror. I don't know that Pierre will survive this. I don't. I agree with you. I don't think it's time for infighting, but I think this is the reality of political parties. It is there where the daggers will come out.
I think one of the things though that puts pressure on them, despite the fact that Nova Scotia and Ontario are throwing lobbing grenades these days. There was an Angus Reid poll I saw at some point in time that when they asked people if there was no leader, who would you vote for, and the Conservatives won. So I don't think you could downplay the fact that Pierre Poilievre was very popular with Conservatives, but not very popular with a lot of other people.
And that's one thing I would like to mention is I had the opportunity to sit down with him twice, and I found him very good one-on-one. But the issue was, and I had to ask them this. I said, when does the attack dog thing go away?
Yeah, we talked about it.
And part of it was, he says, I am the leader of the opposition. I'm supposed to hold the government accountable. So sometimes that comes across not well to the Canadian way. Mm-hmm. And the Canadian way is we're polite, we're courteous, we say thank you to ATMs, like we're all those things. And I think that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way because he undressed Trudeau on a daily basis. And I think a lot of Canadians went, that's good, but I mean, you eviscerated the man. And I think that is just, Stephen Harper was very congeal and just, he was an amicable person.
He was witty and he was to the point without necessarily crossing that.
Without, right? Some of those barbs. So anyway,
again, a nerd. He was a nerd. Let's be honest. Don't you remember that? Do you remember that photo?
He could play the organ really well. Right. I saw that.
Right. And the first time he dropped off his kid at school, he shook his hand. Don't you remember that one? That was classic.
The irony, though, is anybody that speaks publicly about Pierre outside of the media says he's a phenomenal human being. Mm-hmm. And again, I read articles about that over the last 8 weeks of how do you take the man that people sit down with and get that message out publicly, and they quite obviously struggled to do that. I mean, when push comes to shove, they lost the election, and again, I am a believer in democracy, so they got to look within and say what's got to change. So I don't know where Rona Ambrose is right now, but somebody should call her and see what she does.
She was always nice.
We could go on and on, but we'll try and we'll touch on some local issues. We are densifying our city. There's a lot of infill, and we happen to have a guy that was former CAO of this fine city. So I want to get your thoughts on this as well. But are we creating more congestion, and do we need more roads? So this is something that I think I've heard about enough times because there's been some projects coming along. One is by the hospital. Do we need to challenge developers to put more parking into projects? And I want to lead with you, Ron. Is this something? And you get to see other communities as well. I don't want to just make it about Kelowna, but are you seeing more projects coming online and there's just less and less parking, and the developers are just saying, like, listen, this makes it economical for us to do this, so we're going to put it forward without as many parking stalls as maybe we once could have.
Yeah, I think there's always a real lag, and people get good ideas. Hey, here's a good idea. Let's densify. And I'm a planner. Spent 45 years pushing densification. Trying to get us from not sprawling, especially in a community where you have ALR land, and densifying our cores, making them livable. I think South Pando's is a pretty nice place to live, and yet the density is increasing there. So I think there's that trade-off. But when it comes to things like congestion, that is that trade-off, and where we haven't been, I think, very good at it is getting that balance between densification, relieving of congestions. I mean, time and time again, we've shown that more roads don't help, and you can't widen roads where you can't widen roads. I mean, there's houses, there's things. The alternative was looking at alternative transportation, but we still live in not everybody's going to ride their bike in winter. Not everybody's necessarily going to get transit. So I think when we put these policies in place, I think we got to let the air out of the balloon slowly. I don't think we just, density's good. Let's get a lot of density. cars are bad, let's just stop all the cars. I think somewhere in between there, you have to move slowly because, I used to always say when our engineers, had called it transportation demand management, which just says, yeah, you're going to be stuck in traffic, don't drive. We're not making the roads wider. And I said, transportation demand, I understand the principle, but to most citizens, it's just bad engineering. Like you guys haven't figured it out. And so I think you have to, you have to move in these directions. And sometimes local government, buys in big time and without necessarily thinking, kind of like densification of single family, four units on a lot. Great in principle. Let's make better use of our land. In some cases, it's going to create huge problems in some neighborhoods.
So, and as we keep hearing, there's a housing crisis. So a lot of people would say, no, we need to build. And you say
I think everybody said that, didn't they?
Don't get me started. but you're talking about let air out of the balloon slowly. What do you mean by that?
I think transition some of these changes. I think rather than just all of a sudden, boom, immediately every lot in the city has 4 units, even if it may or may not have the capacity and all those things. I think, should have been encouragement to do that. Kind of like Kelowna did. Kelowna took that mid part of the downtown, created something called the R7 zone, pre-zoned all the land, and said if you could put a fourplex in this area, just come and get a building permit. But they did it in an area that knew it could work. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I mean. When you implement some of these changes, I think it's important to implement them over time and to see the effects and adjust rather than say, okay, flip the switch.
Scott, over to you. What do you think the city's moving in a good direction as far as infill and densification and all that stuff? But the ripple effect, obviously.
Well, I live in the Lower Mission area, and to Ron's earlier point, as far as South Pandolzi is beautiful and everything, and then densification has grown. Like there's 6 new condo units in that area alone that have just grown in the last while, and to this day we're trying to figure out where all those people are going to drive and park and be part of that community, because I don't think the amenities are growing as quick as the buildings are going up. And I think that the village center idea we talked about a few podcasts ago, if Rick recorded it, might have been the ones that Rick didn't record.
Maybe not.
Finally, somebody got the shot in.
That's a real story, by the way.
The missing files. The missing files.
That we talked about those village centers specifically. I think, Jeff, you were talking about Calgary and how they've done such a great job of doing that. I used to live in Ladner and on the coast, and we had this little village center that you had all of the amenities you needed. You didn't have everything, but you had enough, and you get your groceries, you get your coffee, you get your movies, and you're good to go. And that was back in the day of Blockbuster. And I think where Kelowna lacks is those centers. I know the Ponds is trying right now, but we lived in Kettle Valley for years, and you're driving 20 minutes for some milk, and it just becomes frustrating at some point. And part of I think the issue is that we are a convenient people, and we're a consumeristic people. And so how many cars drive with one person in them? Well, most of them. It's rare, that we're going to be sharing our vehicle. And transit people, there's just not that vibe. If you go into other countries around the world, you see that's just, people don't have cars, so they don't have another option. And so the densification is ridiculous in other countries. I was just in Bolivia. It's beyond ridiculous. But majority are not driving their own vehicles. And so I think those things, to your point, Ron, there needs to be a mindset around that of how to make that smoother and more accessible to everybody. But it has to be complementary with the amenities that are provided in those community centers, or else it's just more people with less around them.
So you're saying more bike lanes?
More bike lanes.
Lots more bike lanes. Actually, more scooters. I'd like to see more scooters out, because they don't bother me at all.
So I was one of those people that rented 2 or 3 movies on a Blockbuster, came back the next day, it's closed. Right. And I was like, did I win, or am I just going to get hit with a late charge? And
Weekend at Bernie's doesn't count, though.
Jeff, what do you think of this whole? Because you're actually living in a part of the town where you kind of rebuilt on the lot and you did a bunch of things.
Yeah, it's like we're missing a piece of the mathematical equation to me, and again. What do you know? We agree. Like the validity of this is like to find that middle ground, right? And that's it. We've lived in this extremism now for a period of time. Vancouver should be an example to us. Get into Kitsilano where they're building 60 units and no parking stalls, and it's already bumper to bumper, right? Hopefully, Kelowna can learn from that. I think you bring a great reality. The joke about no one's walking or riding a bike in the winter. Well, no one's also taking their kids to hockey practice on the bus. I mean, that is our reality. So I do think we have to find that middle ground. I've talked about this lots. I live in the hospital area. There's another example. You have a facility, and I know this because I have family that's in that hospital. They have now gotten to a stage in the hospital because this hospital facilitates most of southern British Columbia. And people are not showing up for their appointments because they can't park.
Right.
And they can't find parking. And I do not mean to sound like a saint, but on multiple occasions.
Don't worry, Jeff.
And he should know.
Yeah, he's like, that's why I'm looking at him.
Did look at Rick.
But sincerely, on multiple occasions, I have picked up a senior in my area who's lost and said, I parked my car somewhere and I don't know where it is. And we've driven. I have driven from Richter to Abbott, and sometimes it takes 5 minutes and sometimes it's taken half an hour, and it's happened multiple times. It's stuff like that, right? Like we've got to be realistic about things like health. As an example, you have a health facility and no access to the health facility for again, when you talk about an aging population, like a husband and wife from Castlegar that are coming in for a colonoscopy cannot park up at Cottonwoods and find their way to our hospital. It's to your point. We got to find that middle ground. We got to find some common sense. I'm all for bike lanes. Bike lanes, I think, in the city have been done extremely well. I find it extremely fatiguing when you're in downtown Calgary, though, and they have removed one full lane that is now dead empty, and you're sitting in traffic. But again, this comes back to it. It's finding that middle ground. I think the city's done a reasonably good job to date with our bike lanes. Like, they've not removed one lane of Highway 97 or anything like that. Hopefully that's not coming. But where they have done it, it's been fairly reasonable.
Well, further to the bike lanes along Bertram. So I'm on Project Literacy Board, and we were talking about the space that we're at on Bertram, and there's a big bike lane, and it took out parking spots. And I don't know if it's really hit the news that much, but we're trying to get into a new space, and anyway, that area has less parking now. So it could be considered less attractive to somebody that wants to sublet. So in your eyes as a planner, I mean, there's always a cause and effect for whatever you do. So you put in this bike lane, great. Like, honestly, that is a fantastic bike lane. But it has that ripple effect on those businesses, and I'm just talking about a charitable office, but it has a ripple effect all the way down Bertram.
Yeah, no, but is that not to connect the overpass that's going over the house?
Yes.
So it makes a bit of sense there. I mean, when you said there was a bike lane on Bertram, I'm thinking, why would there be a bike lane on Bertram? But of course, would you have the overpass coming, so you need to get people through. Yeah, those are the trade-offs, and yeah, I think to me, the bike lanes were important because they allowed the opportunity for people. And I had people say to me that they would never ride their bike downtown or in the city if it wasn't for bike lanes and way in. So now they're getting out and they're healthier. But I think, I do think there has to be a balance when you implement these things. Vancouver's a little different because you can ride your bike. My daughter lives in Victoria, and you can ride your bike to work pretty much the whole winter, and you put on another layer. And I know there's going to be people in Kelowna now writing in saying, I ride my bike, Ron. And I know there are people that do it, but it's just not, in many ways, like transit. It's not, everybody can't avail themselves of that. And so, so what are we doing? There was a great poster I saw once said, you can't complain about traffic, you are traffic.
That's a good one, actually.
I think Rick was just mad he lost his parking spot being on the
Did
board.
you?
That was,
I know,
it was part of
it
the MOU he had with them. It was
put it on laminate.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I would say, I actually think it goes back to our previous conversation in this episode around politics. I think we've lost the understanding of what it means to be neighborly. And, so many folks don't know who their neighbors are to begin with. Number two, there's this sense that I'm self-reliant, I'm self-able, so I do not need other people's help. And I think, decades ago, that was not the way. You could go over to somebody's house for some eggs or some sugar or whatever, and today people just don't want to do that. They don't want to rely on others, and I think we that's been accentuated by the lack of dialogue between political parties and rhetoric and those things that we're finding out what we don't like about each other rather than what we like about each other, and I think we've lost a sense of who we are and that value, and I really believe that plays into these type of conversations, because if we learn to be more neighborly, if we take her like Jeff, I'm not sure many people would stop and pick somebody up that's wandering around, and so that gets you to saint in training level, but it's getting up there. It's higher than Rick, and
Most of us are higher than Rick.
But you have totally, I'll knock myself right down to earth here, because the neighbors around me, phenomenal people, except I'm going to say one who decided a couple years ago to come up to me and start screaming at me about using a gas blower one day, like I was single-handedly ruining the environment.
That was you?
Yeah. No, I know who it was. And I'm like, really? I don't know you. Hey, man, you want to have a debate about it? Sure. And here's the irony. I kept that gas blower for 3 more years, despite the fact I was actually going to buy an electric one that week, just despite this guy. You know what I mean? Did you get to a stage where you're like...
Come down a couple of You were doing so well, Jeff.
but it's to your point, right? It's I wasn't doing anything illegal, you don't have to come over and get righteous on me, but that was... that was at the height of, that was probably 2021, and that's kind of where we were in the world, right?
But it's this whole kind of lack of civility. I mean, the Karen movement, you see 100 pictures of people doing just what you said. In the election, there were a group of people that would harass people going, you know what? You vote for who you want. Right. Why would you go and stand with a placard and yell at people? I mean, that makes no sense to me. But it goes to that. I mean, one of the things I saw when I moved to Edmonton was generally this prairie. It's a different way of thinking. I mean, prairie people are actually pretty neighborly. Like just in passing, funny. My daughter came from Victoria and she moved to Calgary, and she was walking through and she was crossing where the subway, whatever they call it over there now, I can't remember. C-train. And lady, so she had her hands in groceries, and so there's these little gates, and this woman in front of her opened the gate and it slammed as my daughter got to, and she stopped, turned to us, oh my God, I'm so really sorry, I should have held that for you. And my daughter said, well, I hadn't seen that in a long time. Yeah. That level of neighborliness that actually apologize for not helping somebody, right?
It's funny though, and again, I'm certainly not going to get the level of sainthood in training or anything, but if you
what did you do nice?
Well, if you do a barbecue with free food, and I do like most of my neighbors, but if you do a barbecue and you flyer the neighborhood and say there's a free barbecue, just come if you want and mingle. We had 40 people there. Yeah. And just in the cul-de-sac. So it is possible. You just got to ply them with free food. And whatever and they'll show up out of the woodwork. And it's good to know who the neighbors are because, you never know when you'll need them. That sort of thing. Let's finish there because, we all got places to go, people to see. But this episode of Off Center is brought to you by our good friends at Soil to Sod Landscaping Project. You go call them. Okay?
Speaking of saints.
Right here.
No, Soil and Sod, not you. That's
Come on. Thanks again for watching, for listening.